How do I unit test HTTP Digest Authentication in Flask? I've got a Flask app that implements a REST API. For reasons, I'm using HTTP Digest Authentication. I've used the flaskhttpauth library to implement the digest authentication and it works. However, I am unable to authenticate in the unit tests. For the unit tests, prior to setting up the authentication, I'm doing something like this. Prior to implementing the authentication, this was fine. Now I get a 401, which is expected as the initial response for a digest auth request. I've searched and followed a few suggestions related to HTTP basic auth, using parameters data equals, hashtag various stuff, and follow underscore redirects equals true, but I've had no success. Does anyone have a clue how to implement a unit test in this case?
Unfortunately, digest authentication is harder to test or bypass in flaskhttpauth. One option is to actually calculate the correct hashes and perform the full authentication during tests. You can see a few examples of this in the flaskhttpauth unit tests. Here is one. In this example, the username is John and the password is bye. Presumably you have some predetermined credentials for a user that can be used in unit tests, so you would plug those in the A1 variable above. This authentication dance can be included in an auxiliary function that wraps the sending of a request during tests. That way you don't have to repeat this in every test.
It's not necessary to use real-world authentication in tests. Either disable authentication when running tests or create test user and use this test user in tests. For example, of course this test user must never be active in production. Smile for implementation of running _from _tests. The test if code is executed from within a py.test session, if you are using py.test.
If you want to see more, please consider subscribing.